Teslin Kwaan, it's always good coming to Tlingit gatherings where I don't need to translate. You know it. So it's an honor being here today on T'aku Kwaan. Like I said before yesterday at the warming of hands, it's coming home for us. T'aku Kwaan, this is where we're originally from. So it's always good coming back to the motherland. So thank you for coming here and getting to hear a little bit of our experiences on the other side of the mountain. Things are a little different over there. Different realities that we face, different government. And so just want to share a little bit of what we've experienced on the Canadian side of the border, and how in the Yukon we're implementing our self-government agreement, and how that's given us the ability and the freedom to integrate our clan system into our government. They're not two separate structures. It's that we've developed our own internal government system that's based upon our clan governance system. So if we're gonna start by singing a prayer song, if you don't mind standing up if you can. Hai Shakhsati, Hai Shakhsati, Daki on Kau, Daki on Kau, Ishana Wan, Ishana Wan, Daki on Kau, Daki on Kau, Hai Te Dashi, Hai Te Dashi, Daki on Kau, Daki on Kau, Gunach Chish Ho Ho, Gunach Chish Ho Ho, Daki on Kau, Daki on Kau. I want to introduce my two aunties here. My auntie Madeline, she's from the Yanyedi clan, and my auntie Emma, who's from Kokoton. So I'd just like to thank them for sitting up here with me. It's always good to have our elders with us from my community, and also you can give me a little kick if I say something wrong. Not too hard. So I don't know if you wanted to say anything before we start. I always giggle every time I look at my drum. Wayne Carlick from Atlan did this. Our annual General Assembly that we had once a year. I got my drum stained on a curtain, and at the last one I got my drum stained on some cake. So it seems every AGA I stain my drum. I got two different corners and two different colors to stain it. We need some yellow. I'll try to find that next time. So anybody been to Teslin here?
Yeah.
Well, it would better. You're from Teslin. Sunny. So, in Canada, well, our people originally from T'aku Kwaan. So hold on, hands up to our people that we come home to see. My grandfather, Yektugu Deshitan, he was born here in Juneau. And my great-grandmother, Nina Johnson, is a great-grandmother to how many of us? Yedi, she was also born here in Juneau, so it's coming home for us. So the same culture that's down here on the coast, that's the same Tlingit culture that we have in Canada. That border doesn't change anything. The only thing that changes is the way that governments interact with us. In Canada, we just celebrated the 300th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation that was made by the British Crown in 1760. When was that? 1763 is the 250th anniversary. And so the British Crown declared in the Royal Proclamation that the Crown, which is the government, must engage First Nations and sign treaties before they can come and before the Europeans can come and occupy lands. And so the British Crown set that relationship that they had to engage with us to sign treaties, to sign an agreement between nations, a government to government, a nation agreement. So luckily that was done, because the British Crown could have came in and said, we're just going to wipe, as they've done in so many places across the world, go in and just exterminate the people and just completely overtake them, rule them. But the Royal Proclamation looks great on paper. When it comes to application, a lot of times the government still acts like there is no treaty process. That this idea of discovery, the theory of discovery, that they discovered this land, and that they're now the new owners. So it was a lot of treaty negotiations that we had to engage. And luckily in the Yukon, it's relatively new, our exposure to the T'aku society. It really was with the gold rush that affected the whole Tlingit nation here as well as us Tlingits on the Canadian side of the border. The big influx of Europeans coming to our territory. That also brought Indian Affairs, like you have your Bureau of Indian Affairs here in America. We used to call them DIA, Department of Indian and Northern Development. DIA, Department of Indian Affairs. Well, they had the Indian agent, and they got their power through the Indian Act in Canada. It was an act that was written basically to govern one race of people. That act told us where we could live, where we couldn't live, that we couldn't own this, we couldn't go there, we couldn't marry this person. See, my mom married T'aku Kwaan, and because she did that, she lost her status. That she was no longer considered an Indian by the Canadian government. So that means I was born, I was not considered an Indian by the Canadian government when I was born. But Bill C-31 came along and helped fix that situation. But that's just the way the government has treated us on the Canadian side as well, even telling us who's Indian and who's not. Like, who are they to tell us who we are? Because the government told my mom she's no longer status, she was no less Tlingit than a Tlingit who did have status. But it was just used as a dividing tool to divide the people. So then Indian Affairs, they set up this band council idea that was a foreign way of governing our people. Where we had an elected chief and then we had elected councillors. And I heard then that ballroom number 2, someone asked that question about all these different outside government organizations, and then we had the clan system here in America. The two conflict a lot because they're a lot of ways they're incompatible. Our way and then the European way. So it was 40 years ago, Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. It's a big document in Canada. Elijah Smith, Sam Johnson was another one of them from our community. and a whole delegation from the Yukon, they traveled down to Ottawa with this document called Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And it basically told the Canadian government that we want to sit down with you, government to government, and we want to work out a deal. We're equals. So we want to be started to be treated like equals. And so there's a little quote from the document, Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow, that really recognized the importance of our culture. We call, as you all know in Tlingit, we call it Hakusti. But in the Yukon, every First Nation has a Hakusti. Every First Nation had their way. And so this document, Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow, helped recognize that it's only by going back to that original way will we really be able to make a difference in the lives of our people. And so one of the quotes from it was, our only defense against assimilation is a strong, unified Indian identity. Our old people will once again be encouraged to make our children aware and proud of their heritage. The young can once again be proud to listen. Too long have our young people been taught by the white man to be ashamed of our heritage. That teaching of shame, I know you had that same thing on this side of the border. I heard it today from so many people that they were taught to be ashamed of their language, ashamed of their culture. In Canada, we had the residential school system, where the Canadian government allied with some churches to run these residential schools and to basically steal our kids from our community and drag them off to these, they're like jails, and where they were institutionalized, they were abused in every which way possible, and then taught that they were just dirty Indians and that their culture was of the devil. My mother was one of those survivors, and we have quite a few survivors with us here today. My mom, she told me the story of the Indian agent coming to town and herding all the kids into the back of a cattle truck, and they'd be standing, and they were driven all the way to Lower Post, which was what, 300 miles, just standing up in the back of a cattle truck. That's how they were treated by the government. So that assimilation that's continually was tried and enforced upon our people, that continues today. That I'm a second generation survivor. In Canada, we have this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The government finally recognized that they made a big mistake with residential school, and they established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that's going around Canada, documenting all the tragedy and the sufferings that our people endured in residential school. But they're starting to realize that it doesn't just end with those survivors, that it continues through the generations. My mom, through no fault of her own, taught me what she learned in Lower Post in the residential school. So I too became a victim, became a survivor of residential school, even though I had never attended myself. And we get that, and then I pass that on to my kids. And so we find that intergenerational cycle happening within our communities. And that's why the elders with Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow, they said the only way we can fight that is by going back to our way. Remembering who we are and going back to that and living it. So luckily 20 years ago, it took 20 years from the time that they went to Ottawa, from the time that they finally signed the Self-Government Agreement, the umbrella final agreement in the Yukon, which was agreement between the 14 First Nations and the Government of Canada and the Government of the Yukon, which recognized our Aboriginal rights and title within the Yukon. Teslin was one of the first three signatories to this umbrella final agreement. And so we were able to implement our self-government agreement. And one of the things that gave us the ability to do was to model our government after how we think it should be, after how our elders told us it should be, following Hakusti. And our clan governance, it's so part of us that people who are not Tlingit have a hard time understanding why it's so deep-seated within us. It's entrenched, our clan system. I'm Yanyedi because my mother was Yanyedi, because her mother was Yanyedi. It's just the way it is. And so that's one of the things that we were able to do within Teslin, was to take that clan structure. And one of the things that we're very mindful to do, is not to interfere in internal clan business. That each clan, we have 5 clans in Teslin. We have my clan, the Yanyedi, and we also have T'aku on the wolf side. On the raven side, we have Kokaton, we have Deshiton, and we have Ishkiton. Each of those clans has their own clan leader, as it should be, and each of those clans run their internal business as it should be. Teslin Tlingit Council, we never interfere in internal clan business. That's internal clan business. We know better than to try to step in on that. But what we knew is that for us to run an effective Teslin Tlingit government, we had to work together with the clans to have a government that they helped develop, and to have a government that they supported as well. That they're not at odds with each other. And my clan appointed me as the executive councillor to represent my clan within Teslin Tlingit Council. So that's how the clans integrate into the government. Our highest legislative body is our General Council. And the General Council consists of the 5 clans. And each of the 5 clans puts forward 5 of their members to sit on our General Council. They select it however, we don't tell them who they should put forward. We leave it up to each clan to say, this is who we choose to sit on our General Council. And it's the spirit of equality. That's one of the things that our elders taught us, is that we don't have more members from one clan and less from another clan. It doesn't matter how big that clan is, how small, is that we recognize the equality of the 5 clans by having 5 members from each clan. And then on General Council, we operate by consensus. It's not majority rules. It's not 3 against 2 or 4 against 1. We all have to agree as a council for anything to move forward. Consensus. It's a lot slower way of government. And there's less drama than we see in the American government and we see in the Canadian government. But it's the way that we were taught how to operate. To work together. To bring our differences to the table and try to work it out and find a common ground. That's the way we've always operated. And so that's why we stick to that consensus. That's the heart of the way our General Council and all our government bodies operate. Now the General Council looks after legislation. That's another thing that we have through our self-government agreement. In the areas that we have agreements under, let's say education or health and social, child welfare, the land, we have full legislative authority. And that means that when we develop our own legislation, we push out, on our settlement land, we push out the Yukon laws, we push out the Canadian laws, and ours becomes paramount. And the laws don't just apply to us on our land. Anybody who's on our land, the law applies to them as well. And we have a member of our Justice Council, Annie is here as well. The fancy shoes. And that's one of the joys that we have with our self-government agreement, is that ability to do it ourselves. And we heard in the ballroom number 2, sometimes we can be so afraid to do things ourselves because we're afraid of making mistakes. Well, we made a lot of mistakes. Teslin Tlingit Council, because we're what, 17 years old, 18 years old? What 18-year-old do you know who's never made mistakes along the way? But we have that ability to learn from our mistakes. That's the only way that we can learn is by, if we're not gonna have the courage to at least try, we're never gonna know if we can or can't. And the ability within Teslin Tlingit Council for us to learn from those mistakes and to amend and to change what we need to do, that's where we have that ability. And I forgot to say, if anybody has any questions or anything, just feel free to jump in at any time.
Excuse me, I have a question. Has the Canadian government apologized to your people for the horrible treatment they did to you in the past years? Have you gotten an apology?
Yep, that was in June 2008. The Canadian government officially apologized for what they did to us in the residential school.
So was there restitution?
There was a financial restitution. I think the initial fee was, what was it, 15,000?
It was called 10-3. The first, for every person that went to residential school, they paid them 10,000, I think it was, for the first 3 years, and then so much for the years that you were in residential school. That was a payout for every person that attended residential school. That was given by the government. And then they had, there was litigations, but the Canadian government had meetings with First Nations, and what they did was, instead of going into the courts and having litigations, what they started doing was having adjudicators for each person that was charging any of the residential schools that they went to.
How did they include the people that had passed on? So that
the residential school payment only went back to May 2005.
so
The people that had passed on were not even recognized. And one of the things the Canadian government is saying, once that's paid out, that's a done deal. But we as First Nations are going after the government for first generation and second generation impacts, because that's what we're fighting. And like you heard with in one of the workshops, they said one of the major stumbling blocks, the biggest block, the cement wall, is the language that was lost during the residential school era. And like even for myself at 63 going on 64, I have the words here. I know I do, because I can say the words and everything. I was 5 years old when I was taken. That's the only language I knew. And but that's the trauma around the whole thing. And that's what holds us back. And it's very true what one of the elders here said in June, that healing has to come first. Before the language can come
it's
back.
a post-traumatic stress disorder.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is multi-generational, and I experienced that. I am Yupik from the northern part of Alaska, and that's what we're experiencing, and that's why we have, all the malaise that continues.
And we have a good foothold. I just wanted to make, if I could, Duane, make one comment. Like Duane said, I sit on the Justice Council. And I do, and it's called the Administration of Justice. We just signed an agreement with the Canadian government in February of this year. Was it this year or last? This?
Well, no, we signed the agreement February 2011.
Yeah, for our own admin of justice. In that agreement, and the Canadian government, I don't think, realize yet what they have done. They have signed an agreement that has Hakusti in it. Canadian government, I don't think, really understand what Hakusti this to you is, this document is in the court, and we're going to find out how strong it is in dealing with this. But the Canadian government, I think they're going to be in for a rude awakening when they realize just how strong that document is.
It's like the morning, it's like the morning after.
For us.
Canadian government's like, what did I do?
Because we can create our own laws, and we can create our own legislation on our land.
I have a question. I understand that Canada doesn't have a law like we have for Indian child welfare and children get taken away. Do you have something that you use to apply to your children?
Well, right now in the Yukon, until we develop our own legislation, the general laws of application still apply. So right now, the Yukon Child Care Act, Teslin hasn't signed, we haven't enacted our own legislation to replace that act. So the Yukon Child Welfare Act still applies in Teslin. Where Carcross, they have signed their own Child Welfare Act, Family Act. The problem is then the government tries to undermine that authority. So even though we have it signed on paper that it's a great agreement, it's the high watermark to self-government within Canada, but they do everything to undermine us implementing it.
I know I was at a conference last year and I made a presentation and I met somebody from the eastern side of Canada, and apparently kids are just removed and not returned home by the hundreds. And
Well, that was the 60s scoop in Canada. Then that's when it was really bad. So the residential schools were coming to a close, but then the Canadian government did the 60s scoop, which is basically they went in and apprehended our children and scattered them across the globe. And they're slowly coming back now. So it's all that product of trying to assimilate and divide and conquer.
Because they couldn't break us in residential school. So that was the idea behind the whole 60s scoop, was to grab them when they were just born. The babies were just born and they'd be able to bring them up as non-Tlingit.
so, I'm sorry, somebody had a question. I just wondered, because I know somebody else mentioned healing, I just wondered what you use to help people who are coming home and need to go through that healing of learning who they are and what they're doing.
See, my mom was a survivor of residential school, so she had carried that around for her for quite a few, all her life. That pain, carrying that around all her life. And they had these programs that were going on in Teslin about healing, but it was an outside culture view of healing. And so the mom's supervisor at the time, mom was the elders worker, and her supervisor at the time tried saying, well, this course is mandatory to take this course, and mom's like, I don't need that course. Mom's like, I have my Hakusti, I have my culture, my Tlingit teachings. That'll help me with healing. That's all I need for healing. And so she told her supervisor, fire me, because I don't need that. And I think we're starting to realize in Teslin that we have everything we need within our community, within our people, within our culture. That we don't need to look for answers outside anywhere else. We have it. We just have to remember that and start utilizing what we already have. And so it's more of remembering that again. It's going to take time. Can you wait 1 second?
Well, I wanted to ask, you said your council is recognized by the Canadian government. Is it recognized sovereign?
But and sovereign, that they recognize that as part of our Aboriginal rights and title, yes. That when we enact legislation in the areas where we have that ability, that our law supersedes the territorial law, our law supersedes even federal law. That we reign supreme basically on our settlement land.
Okay, where I was leading to then, we as Tlingits on this side and you on that side, they used to be called the J Act.
J Treaty.
Yeah, J Treaty.
And the J Treaty, we call it the J Act, that I can go and there's no boundaries.
Yeah.
I can hunt as long as I'm invited on your land to
Yeah.
hunt and back and forth. By any chance, now I'm going to take a big step, that your tribal council writes agreements with either the clan traditional councils or the IRAs on this side, so we don't get questioned on the other side. Have you guys looked into that? We started looking at this about 12 years ago because we wanted to do trade with the Teslin, and somebody suggested, well, you can take sockeye up there, but then everybody's going, well, we got to count. Where'd you get it? How'd you get it? You know, and in the United States, the IRAs, basically, the federal government through the IRAs can only tell you what you can't do. But it sounds like you guys worked it out where you guys tell the federal government that this is what we're going to do. And to me, it sounds fantastic. But the other question about the J Act, if you guys would look into that, and it would really help us on this side too.
Well, I know the American government recognizes the J Treaty because I can cross over. I have my American Social Security. That I needed a letter from my First Nation, from Teslin Tlingit Council, saying I'm at least 50% blood quantum, and bring my status card, and brought that to the American Social Security office down in Washington, and got my Social Security card. I felt like asking them right away, so which way to the welfare office? Thanks for my card.
See on
But
that,
the
on that
Canadian
statement,
government
on
doesn't.
that statement though,
Yeah.
that's like us over here,
Mhm.
and sometimes we're really sarcastic and call it our pedigree card.
Yeah.
So we show our blood quantum, and we're going across. That's the other question I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
is the blood quantum. In 1935, BIA came up with the idea of the blood quantum,
Yeah.
and we said it was basically genocide.
Yeah.
Do you have a blood quantum?
Yes. In
Well-
Canada, we do.
Well, in Canada, the Canadian government tries giving us a blood quantum when it comes to who they define as Indian under their status. Teslin Tlingit Council, we're in charge of our own citizenship, so we refuse to use blood quantum in our citizenship. That we're like, if you can trace your lineage back to Teslin, that's all you need. We don't care if you're 1/16 or 1/4 or a full. That you have just as much rights to be a Teslin Tlingit citizen, regardless of what your blood quantum is.
164? You can follow your lineage all the
As
way.
long as you can trace your bloodline to Teslin, that's all you need for our citizenship.
And that,
But the Department of Indian Affairs in Canada restricts, they have a blood quantum to define who's Indian under the Indian Act. And so that's the only ones they'll fund our self-government for, is those who are defined as status. But our list is a lot larger than those who just have status. We choose to recognize everyone. We offer programming and we recognize them as citizens regardless of whether Indian Affairs says they're Indian or not. They're Tlingit to us.
Then my last question is, how do you feel being called an Indian?
I'm Tlingit.
Okay. So in your constitution,
It's Tlingit.
all right.
Yeah. The Canadian government still calls us Indians.
I just wanted to make one comment on the blood quantum. Canadian government has formula that they use, they call the 6-1. Soft way of pushing the Indians out. By 10 years, 20 years, you won't have a true 100% Tlingit. And they have it set up so that they go by your mom, your dad, and eventually it'll work down, because if you married a non-native, then the kids, so once you get down, if you're 6-1, after 6-1, you're not recognized. We recognize these people. We help them out in any way that we can through TTC government. But we do not get the funding from the federal government for these people that we recognize as our own. Because we do respect that and we recognize that. So much so that when we have non-native people that marry into Tlingit, for us, we look at them and they're Tlingit, because they've lived among us so long. And some of them know the customs and practice them even more than our own people. So eventually the government, that is their soft way of saying, they're not in there just pulling and burning and everything now. Just, oh, we have this formula. And you don't fit in there, sorry.
Yeah.
But eventually, I see it as a way of getting out of their responsibility.
And just to talk about the J Treaty, border control is not one of the areas that we have legislative authority on, in as much that the international border. But one of the things that we've talked about is working together with the other nations within Canada to lobby the Canadian government to force them to accept the J Treaty that the British Crown had signed way back when. The American government honors it, the British Crown who signed it. It's still the same treaty that existed back then. There should be no restriction of access for a Tlingit, regardless of what side of the border you're on. It's all our territory. It's not Canadian, it's not American, it's Tlingit territory. So you had a question?
Yes, it's also in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
Just version. It was just like after meeting my dad back home, and I haven't seen too many of the people except here at Jacobs. I have a family that lives in Teslin. My auntie lived there and died there. And my mother's dad, I believe, came up with Canadians. T'aku, she always told us she was, we were thinking on from my dad. But through her dad, I'm going to, I forget the name of it, it's been so long ago that this age. And I went there in the 90s, so when my brother died, George died. When my auntie passed away. I haven't been since.
You gonna come up?
The George Morris died, I was up there. I went through for one, two, my mother asked me to go with her because she didn't want to go with me. And I said, it seems like my lineage went that way too. I'm not quite sure. At least, I didn't realize how many of my dad's people we got through. That's why I'm here. I'm not the best driver at night, but I took a chance.
Sheesh. And yeti yeti. Grandma Rosie was her cousin. Yeah.
My dad's name was Aucoin.
I'm going to sing a song that Grandma Rosie taught me. I'll sing it at the end of here. End of this tonight, yeah. Masa, you do a sound?
Shiny, I'm Margaret Betson.
Sheesh. Thank you for driving here tonight.
Getting back to Tlingits in Canada and in the U.S., would an agreement on reciprocity, such as a memorandum of agreement to work with both, so you could transition without a lot of hassle and use both lands, would that be helpful?
For both sides of
For both sides, yes.
I
Recognizing
think,
you're the same people.
the more we work together, the more scared both governments will get.
Well, they need to be scared because it's
Yeah.
our home, you
Yeah.
know, and we're people who care about people and the environment,
Yeah.
and the environment is going down the toilet right now, so I think we need more memorandums of
Yeah.
agreement.
More working together,
Right.
regardless of what side of the border we're on.
Absolutely, and people who think we instead of me.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming.
Sheesh, thank you.
So do you have a designated, excuse me, a designated land base? Do you have one?
Yeah, we had, good thing I did my research before. I Googled. Well, our lands people aren't here with me, so they're the ones that make us political people look smart.
Do you have a,
Yeah, we started off, our traditional territory was 27,000 square kilometers. And so in the final agreement, our settlement land is 2,400 square kilometers. And on our settlement land, that's where we have full legislative authority. And on settlement A land, we have also subsurface rights, so anything below the surface is also ours. And then we have settlement B land, where everything on top of the surface is ours, but then the Canadian government still controls what's underneath the land. And then we have some fee simple lands. But all those three lands our legislation applies. We do have a business side that our T'aku Kwaan, our corporation, business corporation, but they operate at arm's length. But they take direction from us. It's not the other way around. It's not the corporation running the First Nation. It's we're the ones in charge of the corporation. So we make sure that our values, T'aku Kwaan, still applies to the business side as well. We're not going to go in and totally destroy our land just to make money. But there's more important things in life than money. And so there has to be that respect, which is the core of T'aku Kwaan, the respect for oneself, the respect for each other, and the respect for the land, and the water, and the air.
Yeah, my name's Daniel Brown. I'm T'aku from Angoon. And I know that the ramifications that have we've fought and bled for is actually coming to light, because when I was crossing the border and coming into the Canadian country, I pulled out my passport, and they looked it up on the internet, and they said, "Oh, you can't come through here as an American citizen, but you can come through as a Tlingit."
Yeah.
So I pulled out, he said, "If you have a tribal card." So I pulled out my tribal card, and I showed him my tribal card, and they allowed me to go through. But when I got through the other side, coming back to America was a different story. See, when I went to America, they said, well, underneath the, I think it was the Homeland Security Act.
Yeah.
If you have any kind of injunctions on you for anything, your name pops up, and then you have to investigate.
Yeah.
So I had to give them my passport to come in. But I just want to thank you guys for what you guys have done with the Canadian government, because like she said, T'aku Kwaan encompasses not only the Tlingit that are dead, but your branches, your family. T'aku Kwaan Tlingit Ani. It stretches all the way through back to here.
Yeah.
You know, I remember During celebration, he says, the Inland Tlingit say goodness cheese, and you guys say goodness cheese, eh? But when it all comes down to it, T'aku Kwaan
Yeah.
is that we're always thanking and supporting one another. And so with you guys' work that you guys have done, it has not only enhanced us here, well, it's given me hope. And what you're saying is that your corporate structure, that the infrastructure enhances to you guys, and you guys don't answer to them.
Yeah.
Here in Alaska, the corporate structures, infrastructures want the tribes to believe that they are spokespersons, but they are not.
Yeah.
And that's our ongoing battle within ourselves. It's to tell them that you don't speak for us, you never have, you never will. You're a forced entity, you're brought upon us by the American government, and we don't swallow that kind of food. Your subsistence, that's just another word that you made up, and that's not in our language. Okay? Our traditional food gathering is how we go out and gather food. So what if we use a rifle? So what if we use power boats? It's okay for them to advance, not us. See, that's the ongoing battle that we have. But my hat's off to you guys for what you guys have done, and my deepest respect to the Teslin people for standing your ground. Standing your ground and being strong for us. Because even here, America is not so great for the thing it's. You know, they want to believe that Angshell was the best thing that ever happened, and I always say it's the biggest thing since, it's the worst thing that has ever happened to anybody since the Oklahoma land rush. See, when you say T'aku Kwaan, it's our way of life. It has, and they signed it, and then it's just like they're going to fall back on their sword and say, "What have we done?" And they're going to realize the power of those words. T'aku Kwaan, is the man that we answer to. It's like you say, we only put one man in front of us. And that's the man that created everything. So I just want to thank you guys for that.
One of the things, thank you for that. One of the things that our elders are continually telling us younger people, is that remember who you are. Remember T'aku Kwaan. And they get tired of saying it sometimes because we're in such a rush. We got to do this, we got to do that, we got to implement this, we got to enact this law, we got to get this policy. We forget about the important things. And the elders are always telling us, just slow down for a bit. Learn who you are first. Because a lot of us, because of residential school and all these other tools of assimilation that the governments have used on us, a lot of my generation, we've forgotten who we are. So if you don't know, if you don't have that foundation of T'aku Kwaan, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So this year, this upcoming year, let the cat out of the bag, that nobody knows yet. But Executive Council, we've talked about that we want to start implementing the direction from the elders, that this upcoming fiscal year we want to step back and we want to give the elders the opportunity to teach us once again what T'aku Kwaan is. We want to build that foundation for our community, because in that foundation, that's where we're going to find all our strengths, all our wisdom, all that we need to find will be there. We need to build that foundation of that house. And healing, that's where we need to deal with healing as well. That's what they always say, is a big elephant in the room. Is that if we don't deal with it, well, he's going to come and trample us when we least expect it. So that healing that needs to take place within our people as well, we'll get that from T'aku Kwaan. And so that we can finally put it behind us and move on and build a strong house for all our children.
I have a question.
Okay.
How well did you do under the community as you were beginning to get your education, and how they really stepped in for your language? And I suffered very much, just because I was so definitely in the language. That's all I know. I'm suffering because of that. Catholic churches,
Yeah.
because really they bring you on to because I can just go so far into the good stuff, I can do it again, simply because it's the easiest thing to deal with. It's very, very hard for a lay people to see. Some of them are, a lot of them go on not their education, but themselves, stuff is just see to
Yeah.
and that makes it hard. I don't know if you folks have the same problem.
Well, for us, we have to deal with it because our mothers and our fathers suffered when they took us away. Because in Teslin, when they took my sister and I away, my dad was out on a hunting party. And when he came back in September, he told Mom, "Why didn't you keep my daughters? I want to see them before they take them away." We haven't seen our parents from August to June. And when they come to see us in school, they wouldn't let them see us. They just keep them away. My grandmother came down, she spent a week down there, and she come to the school and told the priest, "I want to see my granddaughters." No. She stayed there 1 week. She kept coming in there. And finally she told the principal, "I'm going to go back right now. If I don't see my granddaughters, I'm not stopping in Teslin. I'm going right to Oilers and see the bishop. And tell the bishop how you treat us and how you treat my grandkids." That's the only time we knew that they were in Rotos to see us. And they finally let us go to them Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And when she came back, she told Mom and them they wouldn't let us see my granddaughters when I was down there. It is hard. And when we came back, they brainwashed us in residential school. They say, "You gotta be ashamed to walk with your parents because they got dark skin. They're sinners." And when we start talking our language in school, it's trapped. Every day, you cry, you scream, they hit you more. And you got to bite your tongue, not to scream or cry, so they wouldn't leave you, so they'd leave you alone. It's tough. I still live with it. I can see it right to this day. I say, the only way we're going to feel better is that our community would welcome us back into the community. Sure, we're back home, how many years now, but we're still on the outside looking in. Until they welcome us back into the community, then we're going to feel at home. I know our parents must have suffered quite a bit. They must have wondered, how come they took my kids away? We don't know how to look after them. Our parents look after us way better than Lower Coast School or any kind of residential school, because there's always food on the table. My dad would go hunt, eat some moose. They would go set net, eat some fish. And there's always bears on the table. But in Lower Coast, you have to take what you get. Sometimes you don't want to eat it, but you got to force yourself to eat. My sister Mary, she died in 1982. She was with me. They got her to make sandwiches, and the jam fell on her hand. She go like that. The nuns saw her. Said, "You stealing?" And my sister said, "No, jam fell on my hand, so lick it off." And that night at supper time, they got a sign on her back and the front. Big pail of jam in front of her. this is what you get for stealing. And nobody can even say anything, or everybody just bite their tongue and cry. And when they have that meeting in Whitehorse, they always bring it up so you can see her standing there yet, and nobody can go over there to give her a hand.
So now all that has changed.
Well, the residential schools were shut down. They were shut down, but the pain still exists through the generations. And I thank my auntie for sharing that. And that's one of the things that gives us that freedom within Teslin Tlingit Council, is that we don't have to act like other governments. We're a Tlingit government. And so if healing is what our people need right now, that's what's going to be our focus, is to make our people well. So that, and that's going to happen by working with our elders, with our healers, our medicine people, to bring healing to our people so that we can move on. Because that's T'aku Kwaan, is you deal with things right away. You don't let it fester, because when you let it fester, it eats away at you, eats away at you. This has been a wound that's been eating away at our people for generations. So it's time that we're starting to deal with it.
I had to deal with discrimination. I went away to Bible college in Oregon, and when I went there, I was so lonely, and I could hardly stay away from the rest. But that's where I began to see some of that stuff that was kicked up inside of me that just started coming on to me. And I pursued my educations right after as much as I could. And those things were hard to deal with. Two of my kids suffered under that thing. They took it on themselves. I told them, you don't have to accept it. Don't accept it. You have to learn how to stand high and above them. If you don't, you'll come. I'm finished. She went to the University of Washington. She graduated. She's working here. And one went to college in California. The other one went to college. And they all made something of themselves. It was hard pressure. I kept telling them, you're just as good as they are. You don't have to put your head down. Hold your head up. Be a part of the world. I dealt with the issues of discrimination. And somehow I came out on the other side. And I'm so glad that I'm so glad to hear about you folks. I'm so proud of you. I was telling my husband is he's like, I told him my dad's family, I just love them so much. I said, I don't really know them. And he told me who you were. I fell in love. And that's the only reason I came. I wasn't going to come. I don't need to come until Saturday. I work with Professor Lance. Good job. Yeah. And he asked me to come and help him on Saturday. So that was the only time I wanted to come. Then I met you folks, so I just went crazy.
In Yeti, we have that effect on me. Sheesh, thank you.
I feel like we have a lot of stuff in common, and I currently, I currently work with elders now, and I would love to put in a plug in the ear there. If you're going to do something with your elders in this area, if we could collaborate in some way, because that's kind of where I feel like I need to focus on too. And one of the things that I work in it's kind of hard to deal with, but one of the things that's happening with our elders is we're seeing a lot of elder abuse and neglect and financial exploitation. And it's really hard to talk about, and people have a hard time talking about it. But I think that would help going through some process to learn about healing. And it's got to come from the elders themselves.
Yeah.
So I would love to cooperate or collaborate more with you on a project. I think that'd be great.
Well, I think that's when we're realizing we've always been leaders in the forefront on all these other issues. I think we're realizing that we're going to be leaders on this front as well. It's because no other community within the Yukon is doing this. Is looking, taking that inward look that we need to do. So I'm sure that I know that we'll share what we learn with others as well to help them. Because that's what we do.
Yeah.
Whatever's given to us is not meant for us to hold to ourselves, it's meant to be shared.
My grandfather's George Sidney, my great grandfather's George Sidney from Teslin. And I always acknowledge my grandfather's people, and I love you very much. Thank you for filling my heart with everything that you've shared. And I really appreciate everything that you've done for your people. I don't know if you know this, but I switched over to SOK First Nation from Carcas-Tagish First Nation. And it wasn't because Carcas-Tagish First Nation wasn't doing their stuff or whatever. It was because my mother is SOK First Nation. And so that's why I switched back to the Northern Shoshone people. And so now I say, Ayan Shaw, Ayakut. I'm an Athabascan woman of the Yukon River, and then you'll know exactly where I'm at the mouth of where the Pelly River meets the Yukon River. And the Tlingit language is so descriptive. And if I say that, everybody will know exactly where I'm talking about Fort Selkirk. So that's what I want you to know. Thank you very much. Let me go back to my weaving.
Okay. I won't tell anyone you were here.
I got a question. Is there a site where we can look up your Constitution and read it? Because I'd really like to read that Constitution.
I've got one last copy here. Anybody want to fight for it? But we have it online.
And if I do read this, do I become a tribal member?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, send in your application. It's www.teslin.com. You go onto that website, you'll find our Constitution and all other documents.
Hi, it's Linda. My mother is Allie, and I grew up here in Southeast thinking that I was Tlingit. But I've always had my foot in the door and always worked as a tradition bearer, and I find it very disturbing that you would grow up with the sole purpose of wanting to define someone else in a way that is so hurtful. I don't need to tell you my mom's story. I don't need to tell you my story. We all have that story, that very hurtful, harmful, tragic story within us. It is hard for me to believe that the church, with so much love in their heart, were so cruel to our children. That under the name of God, or behind the name of God, they did these things. What empowered, or what made someone carry the flag or the charge to take the children away from their mothers and fathers, out of the village. And why, how could that have happened? And then it happens right in front of my face, and it's just got a modern veneer on it. But it's the same thing happening over and over and over again. We just make it look like we're not still trying to civilize the children in a non-native way. It's the saddest thing.
It's more dangerous too, because it's more
I
subtle.
never wanted to have so much power over a being that I had to force them to do, except for being my own children. Aside from that, I just can't imagine how you grow up and think, I am going to take all 20 of those kids from that village, and I'll take all 16 from that village. It's mind-boggling to me. It's like frightful that someone would grow up with the ambition to take children away from them.
Well, they thought they were doing the right thing. And if that excuses, that I don't think it excuses, but
No, it's just confusing,
yeah.
and her hurt is slightly different than my hurt.
Yeah.
It's slightly different than your hurt.
Yeah.
Why does it keep?
It was sanctioned by the government.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as separation of church and state. It was to move us off the land. It was
Yeah.
to get rid of us.
To solve the Indian problem. In Canada, they said to kill the Indian and the child was their policy.
Absolutely.
God.
I was gonna add to what she just said, because my background is in child welfare, Indian child welfare. And we had a law that passed in 1978. And today, this very day, in Juneau, Alaska, 85% of the children in state custody are Alaskan Native children. What's wrong with that picture? I'm sorry, I get
Drugs and alcohol.
emotional. We're losing our children, you guys.
So I think what good will come